Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of current and classic horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews and discussions may include spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy.
I think you're making a mistake. I think you really want to talk to me.
Sorry, I have 3 other interviews to do before this party's over.
Yeah, but they're not working on something that'll change the world as we know it.
They say they are.
Yeah, but they're lying.
There is a limit, even to the imagination.
Human teleportation, molecular decimation, breakdown, and reformation is inherently purging.
Where our greatest creations meet our deepest fears.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
You are about to go beyond that limit.
Those weird hairs that were growing out of your back, I had them analyzed. But they were definitely not human. If you saw how scared and angry and desperate he is.
I'm sure Typhoid Mary was a very nice person, too, when you saw her socially.
No!
You're afraid to be destroyed and recreated, aren't you?
You're changing, Seth. Everything about you is changing.
Oh no, what's happening to me? Am I dying?
I want to know what's going on.
What does the disease want?
Wants to turn me into something else.
Oh no, a fly got into the transmitter pod with me that first time when I was alone. Don't go back to it.
Could be contagious.
I'm afraid!
Don't be afraid.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Welcome to another installment of my year-long Masters of Horror celebration, in which I'm joined by a guest every Friday to chat about one of their favorite films from our month's featured director. For the month of March, we're honoring none other than the master of body horror himself, David Cronenberg. And today's episode highlights Cronenberg's stellar remake of the 1958 classic horror film The Fly, which capitalizes on some of the best 80s practical effects and the dynamic duo of its leads. The Fly follows scientist Seth Brundle, played by Jeff Goldblum, who decides to streamline his tests for his teleportation device he's building. But during his test, a common housefly gets into the telepod, splicing his genes with the fly's. Brundle's journalist girlfriend Veronica, played by Gina Davis, documents Brundle's horrifying metamorphosis into the terrifying creature known as the Fly. And to break down Cronenberg's gene-splicing masterpiece is film writer and host of the Bloody Blunt Cinema Club horror podcast and returning friend of the show, DeVaughn Taylor. Welcome back to the show, man.
Thank you for having me back. We had such a great discussion talking Starry Eyes, and then you came in and crushed it on Bloody Blunt Cinema Club for our Black Christmas special. So I am ready to dive into another one of my favorites.
I was going to say, this is a little bit different than last time we talked because you and I had seen different entries in Black Christmas's trilogy, as it were, kind of just the 3 films within that universe. And it's great to kind of be on a level playing field this time in terms of revisiting a classic that we both love. But I think in getting started, kind of, what is your Cronenberg origin story? Do you kind of remember your first introduction to his work?
Yeah, I can't remember if I had mentioned it when we had talked on when I came on the podcast last time, but The Fly is one of the earliest films I've ever seen. It was one of my first horror films. It was kind of because I remember I watched like A Nightmare on Elm Street, loved it, and I really liked Cube. And so when my uncle saw that, I kind of like a little sci-fi edge, and he saw that I was really enjoying the horror. He's like, all right, you know what? I'm going to just go ahead and step you up a notch. So 7-year-old me watching The Fly was a good time. But I remember just whenever I watched it initially, I was enthralled by it, and I was just like, whoa, this is just so cool. And then just over the years, we'll get into it more, where I have this very new appreciation for it. But as far as Cronenberg goes, I mean, it's interesting because I'm a fan, but I actually still haven't seen too many of his films. I keep meaning to do a marathon one day or go back. So it's I've seen Scanners and Rabid and but I still haven't seen Videodrome for some reason. Every time I go to search for it, it's not streaming anywhere. So I just haven't gotten around to it. But, I've seen A History of Violence, which is a very different side of Cronenberg as well. But, I very much like Cronenberg's, with, the sci-fi horror and how intrigued he is by body horror and the way that he, interlaces sexuality into his horror movies. Not as much here. This is a love story here, but there is still of course there's still his sexual vibes in there, but I've always been intrigued by the connection between sci-fi, body horror, and then sex, the way that he brings those together, and then obviously his son is a chip off the old block,
right?
And taps into literally the exact same type of stuff, just in a different way, which is also really cool. So it's cool that we have two really good Cronenberg directors and giving us some good sci-fi horror.
Yeah, Cronenberg's one of those guys that he's able to kind of take his style and then jump around to different genres, right? I mean, his more recent stuff is more kind of in the, I guess, crime drama world, whereas his earlier stuff is a lot more experimental, and like you said, it's more blending of sci-fi and horror. And Videodrome is one of my favorite films of his, and I'm kind of like you in that I haven't seen a lot of his movies. I've probably seen 5 or 6 of them, but the 5 or 6 that I've seen are incredibly memorable for a variety of different examples of kind of him expanding on that body horror vernacular of his. And it's so funny for me to refer to him, and I think a lot of people do, as being a master of horror, being a master of body horror, and yet I've probably only seen, like I said, 5 or 6 of his films, and yet he leaves such a distinct mark with each film in a way that is, I mean, it's unlike every time you see him do something new in one of his films, or even if it's me going back and watching an older film, I'm like, holy shit, I've never seen anything like this before, just in a way that is so unique.
Yeah, he has a way with his visuals, of just really putting an image, but then also just even though he does weave in and out of genres, there is always just that consistent Cronenberg vibe. And I can't really describe it. It's just you know it when you have a director, and we're talking masters of horror here, and all the masters have that signature, just feel and tone, even maybe not always the consistency thematically, but you just obviously you watch a Cronenberg movie, you're watching a Cronenberg movie, but he just there's just this mood across all of his films that I find really interesting, and that's why I find intriguing that he's able to kind of bounce back and forth between this sci-fi horror side of him, and then like you said, he does these interesting crime dramas, but still kind of a little heady twist to some of them a lot of the times, but you always know it's him whenever you're watching a Cronenberg film.
For sure, and I think that is the biggest telltale sign of it, being a master of horror in a way where you can't really describe it almost sometimes, and yet it's ever present, and it's something that you recognize immediately. And even if somebody threw on a Cronenberg film that I wasn't familiar with and I'd never seen, at the same time, though, I feel within the first 10 or 15 minutes of that movie, you're going to pick up on some of the elements of a Cronenberg. I mean, there's that term Cronenbergian. It's a Cronenbergian film, and it's well, yeah, because that sort of style and mood and atmosphere really, it almost precedes him in a way that is prevalent in almost all of his films. But in kind of talking with you before this and recording, you had described The Fly as being the most tragic love story in horror. I think that's the way you put it. And that's a really, really interesting angle. And it's something that, I mean, you said that to me a couple months ago in the interim. I've seen this movie again twice. And it's something that's stuck with me in a way that has really made me look at the film differently, obviously, than I did when I was very little and saw it, just because, like you had said, we both came to this movie so young that initially we're kind of captivated by the grossness, just yeah, the grossness of it, ripping out teeth and fingernails and breaking wrists and bars and the very kind of shocking body horror moments. But I feel for me, the older I get, it's a film that I obviously take a lot more away from moving up forwards in my life and all of my different experiences and things. And so I'm kind of just curious if you'd talk a little bit more about you finding this to be a tragic love story.
Yeah, so if the listeners haven't checked out Blade Blunt Cinema Club, the foundation of the podcast is, exploring the subgenres within horror. That's what really intrigues me about horror is you can obviously bring horrific elements to a story, but the best ones don't lean on the horror elements. They use the horror elements to, amplify another theme or story going on. So whenever I would start rewatching this a little bit older and stuff, it's very much a character-driven, love story between these two. You have Seth Brundle, who is, he's a misunderstood guy. He's one of those people, he's a genius, and, he's very socially awkward, and, they don't even talk about it, but it's he might even be on the spectrum, if you kind of look at it that way. So it's you're really exploring this person who is trying to, he's on the verge of something great, but he doesn't have, he's doing this, but that's all he has in his life. He doesn't connect with anything else but science until Ronnie comes along, and then once he meets Ronnie, he kind of has a little bit more incentive and motivation, to do these works, but then also looking at it in a different way, not just thinking of, the scientific experiment he's doing. And, and you watch their romance, it's literally what starts the movie, is them two having a conversation and flirting. The movie literally jumps right in. That's the first thing you go to. So, and obviously, because it is a classic, kind of body horror movie, that's the thing that people remember the most is, all the horror stuff. But what I just always love watching is, you have Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis at, arguably the height of their powers in the late 80s, and they had such phenomenal chemistry together, just instantaneously. And so it's that's what whenever I watch it now, that's what I am watching for. And that's, I picked up on kind of some new stuff there too, because you have the relationship between them, and then you have this interesting supporting character in Stathus, the ex-boyfriend, kind of caught, and at first he's, all skeevy and kind of, you're he's gonna be the creepy ex-boyfriend, whatever. But then he even kind of has this redemptive arc of, he still cares for Ronnie, and then sees how much she cares for Seth, and he's still willing to help her out in the end, and support her and stuff. So there's interesting relationship dynamics going on across it, not just in the love story angle, but it is just a really tragic love story, because Ronnie comes in and, she appreciates Seth for who he is and loves him, but then also is trying to help make healthy changes. She goes and buys him some new clothes after realizing he wears the same outfit all the time, and kind of, hyping him up a little bit as far as supporting him through this journey and everything. So it's he is, she's helping these changes among him, but then so is the sci-fi element. He has the literal physical changes happening as well, and I think those two go really hand in hand together. And and who doesn't love a good classic Beauty and the Beast story?
Yeah, really, really well said. That is what I pick up on more and more every time I watch it now as an adult. And we'll get really into the kind of weeds with the dynamic duo and their chemistry, but I never truly appreciated that the relationship and kind of the sporadicness of it, and how, like you said, it kicks off in the first 90 seconds of the movie. It begins that way. It begins with them meeting, and then they sort of form this bond, and then they go from there. And that human element is what makes the end of the film so tragic, right? Like you had just said with the Beauty and the Beast angle, this is what is fueling our investment in the movie. And Cronenberg lucked out in getting Goldblum and Davis for this role, right? I don't look at a lot of Cronenberg's movies and fondly remember them for the characters per se, in terms of just characters being very personable and kind of just their relationships. It's not really something that I attribute to him being all that successful at a majority of the time. Usually I go to his movies for the imagery.
He's a concept. He's a concept guy.
Right. He's a concept guy. Exactly. And this is a film that it is without this dynamic duo of Goldblum and Davis. I don't know how much investment is there, because this movie I am invested in a way that you had mentioned Videodrome, and that's one you should definitely check out for your first film if you're going to dive into some Cronenberg. That is a film, though, that again is like a concept that's based around the visuals and the effects. It's not really one that I'm invested in this character per se. I'm kind of just along for the ride. Whereas the duo of Goldblum and Davis are what make me so invested in this, in it being tragic. Like, it's not just two people that are in a shitty situation. It's tragic because you want to see them walk into the sunset, as it were, together.
Exactly. And I mean, yeah, like I said, like Cronenberg is like a concept guy, which is great. Like, I love like concept movies. I love character driven movies, and this is, you know, from what I've seen, you know, just one of the better unions of those two, because and like you said, like if it wasn't Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum, it wouldn't have worked out, because I mean, because when you look at the individual characters, they are both like pretty flawed as well. I mean, one of my notes is the first thing out of Seth's mouth is him talking about wanting to change the world, him talking and, you know, showing his ego and prowess, and like that's kind of his downfall, is he kind of has this ego, he has this, you know, insatiable desire to want to, you know, do something big and want, which, you know, isn't I mean, it's like a, you know, double-sided like flaw. It's a good thing, but also a flaw for him. And then you kind of look at Ronnie. I mean, it's like her ex-boyfriend is her editor, and then now she's, you know, she forms a romantic relationship with this like new, you know, her story subject. So it's like she's not the best journalist if you go by ethics and morals, at least. But, you know, so it's like you have these like two characters. I mean, and like honestly, like there are scenes like throughout where Seth is like is pretty unlikable at times. Like, he's a very charming guy, but then he's very arrogant and kind of selfish, and like, you know, and that's where the relationship is great, and it comes back in where Ronnie doesn't, you know, like she doesn't shun him for it, but she like tries to reel him in, but then also realize like, hey, there's more to, you know, life and more to this experiment than just the experiment itself, you know. And so she kind of, you know, pulls that humanity out of him. But like, I mean, just every scene they're in together, I mean, but like the opening scene itself is just like the way they look at each other. I mean, they're freaking, both of them have magnificent hair. I mean, we get tons of skin and body. I mean, Cronenberg made this for the bisexuals, as he usually does. And yeah. I mean, because they're both so hot in this movie, but they're also just like so great. Like they really gel together just so perfectly. Like their charms matched up just like, I don't know, so in sync.
I actually had to look up and see if these two were like dating previously or during the filming of this movie, because I was so taken by how captivating their charm and personality is with one another, and just how their dialogue is so snappy in a way that they are convincing as a couple, right? As two people that are meeting and kind of falling in love and becoming an item, because their dialogue is just like two people that are so comfortable with one another. And again, it's like their relationship feels very natural in its forming, and that like she shows up to his house, and then it's showing him the different experiments and things, and it's kind of like she's teasing him. She's like, oh, those are some nice designer telephone booths, when he shows her the telepods. And they're kind of like taking jabs at one another, like you do if you're like flirting with somebody that you find attractive for the first time or something to that extent. And it's just such a natural progression in a way that it doesn't feel like this is forced. And that's an element that I definitely have noticed in some other Cronenberg movies that I've seen, where character interactions or relationships feel forced. It doesn't feel incredibly organic as it does here. And I think that's because of these two actors' just charisma. Yeah,
I would definitely in the performances, but then also have to shout out Charles Edward Pogue, who co-wrote the movie with Cronenberg. I think that probably helped out quite a bit, just in the character department, and like it's snappy, you know, flirty dialogue, but it also doesn't feel like, you know, I'm not watching like rom-com dialogue, you know, that is like just like extra trying to be a little bit snappier. Like it just, it feels really good. It has a good rhythm to it, you know. And speaking of rhythm, this movie is impeccably paced. That has nothing to do with characters and stuff, but just while it was on my brain, like, so the way it flows is so natural.
There's not an ounce of fat on this movie, and that's something that I've only really appreciated in getting to revisit it. I think I've watched this now like 3 times this year for different projects and things like that. But like, this movie is the briskest 95 minutes I think you could have in a movie that gets so insane, going from the conception of their relationship and then going to where it goes, which we'll get into. But yeah, there's not an ounce of fat on this. And to your point about the dialogue never kind of breaking down into like rom-com territory or something. I think you're right in that this is a partnership, whereas I think the co-writer definitely probably had a little bit more to do with the human element, if I was to guess, and then Cronenberg probably came in, because I know that he rewrote the film additionally. He probably added some more of that kind of, I don't want to say coldness, but kind of just rigidness maybe. And that,
yeah,
I would think that kind of like equalized a little bit, but that's a great point as well.
Yeah, that rigidness is definitely important too. Like there's, also like really great exchanges where they're not talking a lot, where it's, very, very subtle kind of things, and they're playing off their looks and stuff like that. It just, it feels really good. And there's also some really great lines. Like one of my favorite lines when I was like rewatching this morning was, when they're back in his apartment and, they're kind of going back and forth. And like I said, Seth isn't the most perceptive when it comes to like social stuff. So I love the line where he goes, oh, what's this? Is this a romance we're having? And yes. Then she's like, yes, I think it is. And like and that line could come off corny too, mm-hmm. but just the way he delivered it was so good. And to also bounce back to the pacing too, was, I've seen this movie, I don't know how many times, I watch it all the time, and I watched it like as soon as I woke up this morning. It was like a great, just like, oh, I'm gonna lay in bed and just like watch the movie, and it was like I put it on, and then it was like I blinked and it was 50 minutes gone by already, and I was like, oh wow, like I totally forgot like that this movie is just so smooth, like not an ounce of fat on it. And because like pacing is a big thing to me. Like pacing is something that can really kill an experience for me. And then also just because like rewatchability is a big thing for me as well. Like if I don't, for me, I know there's people out there that like to just like kind of watch a movie once or twice and they'll just like kind of be done with it. But like for me, a movie is not really worth it if I don't want to go back and watch it multiple times and like try to find these extra readings, So it's like the fact that I've seen it so many times and it's still just such a smooth, it just goes, it washes over you. But that's also so weird to say when you're talking about The Fly, when you also have a guy that is ripping his ear off, he's melting people's ankles, like, we have, it's so weird that a movie like that can have, those things in it, can still be just like such a easy movie to go back to.
And I think that speaks to just how well of a remake this is, right? I mean, it literally takes the original film and it strips it down to, okay, it's a guy, teleportation, and a fly. That's it. They don't try to tie in any of because I don't know if you've seen the original, but there's like this whole family lineage and everything that the mm-hmm. original trilogy deals with. And it's such an expert move on Cronenberg's part to just say, forget all of that. We're starting with the bare bones of what this is, the framework of it. And then he's able to kind of insert what elements he thinks actually need to highlight on, which is obviously the practical effects in the 30 years of practical effects and how far they've come since the original.
Yeah, I've only watched the original like twice, I think. I mean, it's good, but yeah, totally different. And yeah, it has all those, because that's how the movies of that time were, so yeah, it is a great way to adapt it. And I mean, he literally only takes away needs. Like, I mean, the movie starts when Ronnie and Seth meet at this thing, goes straight into telling about the experiment, and then the movie doesn't have like an epilogue or anything. After Seth dies, credits roll. Like, he literally was like, I don't need to show you anything that you don't need. Like, I'm giving you the story right here, boom, bam, boom, and like that's it. And I love that.
Literally just gives us the bare bones of what you need to know about these people, and it never feels like you don't know them, right? And they have barely, and like you said, there's no exposition or anything, and we learn who they are just by observing their interactions with one another. And the amount that you're able to kind of get from that, it stuns me every time, because it's one of those things where you don't need to know Brundle's. I mean, we get a brief exposition when I think Stathus brings up his history, but again, mm-hmm. we know about Brundle's past in 30 seconds, if that even. And so mm-hmm. to kind of just keep the focus be on their interactions with one another, like you said, it just fuels that pacing in a way that it really just makes this more watchable than it should be, considering how demented and disturbing it gets. But some of the interesting kind of considerations for Seth before they settled on Goldblum that I thought were wild were, for starters, James Woods, which...
I mean, duh, I guess, of course.
Not charming enough to pull this off at all.
No.
There was Mel Gibson, again. Don't see that at all. Neither of them also, I feel like, could play off this kind of like nerdy angle with Brundle, like that nerdy identity where you're kind of just like, I feel like those are two kind of way too alpha macho actors that would not be okay with portraying a guy that was like so uncomfortable in his own skin, let alone not knowing how to interact with like this beautiful woman.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I love about Seth Brundle as a character, and like, you know, choosing Goldblum, because like you said, like with Woods or Gibson, it would have been, you know, more the, okay, we have the macho guy that can be soft, and we see that in every leading man in so many movies. You know, it's always the macho guy and then he has a soft side, but this is the opposite. We have the soft, you know, kind of insecure, you know, kind of guy, and then you see the rigidness that he has to him as well, you know, in sometimes the way that he even before the transformation, you know, he kind of already has a hint of that, just like kind of, you know, because he's very efficient in the way he speaks, and like kind of, you know, I know a lot of people like that, and it's like they're not that way, you know, as a bad thing until it's amplified by, you know, the transformation that he ends up going through.
And then I thought it was interesting that they were considering Linda Hamilton for Ronnie, but apparently Linda Hamilton read the script and was like so disgusted by it that she just bowed out. But again, I think that, I mean, Ronnie and Gina Davis is such a good job of kind of just being this person that dives into the deep end enthusiastically, and then as soon as she kind of realizes what she's in for, is so sympathetic, because you do see in her arc where at first this is obviously this is just a story. I'm going to do what I need to do to get this story. I'm going to try to lead this guy on so he takes me to his lab and then reveals more than he should. But then you really do see her again. It comes back to their chemistry. You see her fall for him in a way that is incredibly sympathetic, because by the end of the film, it's what makes it so tragic, is that she has to watch him go from being potentially like this rebound from her shitty, abusive, toxic boss to the dream guy, quote unquote. But then we see what he has to endure for the remainder of the film.
Yeah, she has this great quality of like, you know, she sees the best in him. Like even when things are still starting to go downhill, she still sees the best in him. And that's something that, is something so interesting. And like, I mean, Gina Davis, what a run that she had in this like late 80s, you know, early 90s. You know, whenever she kind of bounced from League of Her Own, then we got Beetlejuice, and then this, like, I mean, she had, and then Thelma and Louise, and then like, I mean, she had such a crazy run in this era. And I mean, and it's like she uses her charm, but she doesn't use like, you know, she wasn't like at this event in like a skimpy outfit or anything like that, you know, or, you know, she's like not like, you know, she doesn't put herself out there in that way, but she knows, she's confident though too. She's confident, she's charming, she knows how to, you know, sweet talk someone, and she kind of, and I like that, you know, she realizes that she's gonna be the one that is like kind of making more of the moves and a little bit more of the instigator, but she doesn't like, you know, see that as a bad thing. And Seth also doesn't like feel like emasculated or anything by like a woman that is gonna just like kind of, you know, I'll guide you, like, you know, I'll get you there, and then, you know, then you just return the moves back and then we'll be all good, you know. And so I do really like the characterization of Ronnie, and the way that she, you know, kind of progresses in the end, and then like, you know, she sticks through him through this whole thing, like the scene whenever he's like really going off, and then she goes to his loft and sees the other woman there, and she's like leaving, and then in any other movie, you know, that character would have gotten all upset and she would have stormed out, and then she would leave, and then 20 minutes later then they would like kind of have a workaround, then they come back together, and it's like then the next thing you know, you have 20 minutes of extra movie that you probably didn't need.
Right.
Instead they just choose to be like, you know, she still sees the best in him. Like I'm just like, I'm scared for you, because I'm scared for like your safety and like where you're going. Like I'm not even thinking about me and you right now. I'm thinking about you. And I think that is like such a powerful, part for her character.
Yeah, they both come off as such genuine people that do care for one another. And I mean, what you just described, that scene is such a great example of that, because it's not about the fact, at this point, it's no longer romantic between them, and yet she hangs around for the worst of what's to come. And it really does just show that these are two people that she loves him in the way that she cares about him, whether, like, I would almost say at that point, like, if you were on good terms with them, like an ex would or something like that. You know what I mean? Like if you got divorced from somebody, you'd say, oh, I always love them to a certain extent. And I mean, Gina Davis goes through it worse than I think most would. But it's just two very genuine people. And it's an element of this film that really surprises me every time I go back and rewatch it, because those aren't qualities that I attribute to a majority of characters that I've seen in Cronenberg's films. It's more about, like we said, the concept and how fucked up and crazy those concepts can go in different directions, but it never comes down to two people that seem like they genuinely care for one another. And it gives this film, again, the kind of tenderness that it needs to make it as tragic as it is in the climax of it.
Yeah, and that's why I say, like, I call it more of a love story than like a romance, because like you said, like it goes beyond just like the romance, because the romance ends, I mean, it's like almost halfway through the movie, maybe like at like the 55 minute mark. So it's kind of interesting, because it's like that's not something you see in, regular romance movies, let alone a horror movie, that they're going to take the time to show this very interesting relationship and type of love. I mean, and it's like so funny, because like, and this is why I love rewatching movies, and like when you never know when you need to rewatch something. Because I mean, I literally just broke up with a partner a month ago, and like we were together for a while, but we're still friends right now. Like we're very close. Like we were literally hanging out today. And it's like you said, like it was because it's like, yeah, I still love this person. I care for that person, So it's like, that's why I love rewatching movies. But it's also, like I said, it's just not a relationship that you see portrayed on screen all that often.
And Cronenberg's approach to sex, I think, is very interesting in that he explores it in multiple different ways throughout his filmography, but it feels like it has meaning behind it in a way that I don't normally attribute with horror movies. A lot of the times, like, I wouldn't even call them romances in horror, but it's more like when characters have sex in horror, it's usually an indication somebody's about to die, right?
Yeah.
But in this, like, it gives legitimacy to their relationship in a way that, like you said, I think it happens probably an hour into the movie, but it's not there's not a lot of sex in the film, but there's just enough that you understand that this is a relationship that they're both invested in a way that we see as it's to Brundle's detriment later in the film, when he kind of brings this, I think she's known as like the barfly on the IMDb page, but he brings home the barfly, and none of the romance is there, obviously, for obvious reasons, but it's more that at that point, comparing the two sex scenes, one is relationship focused and the other one is more like facilitating his insanity almost, or his need to dive deeper into the madness that he's experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like he's not gonna not put sex in a movie. I mean, is what he does. But what is different from his other films is, it's not, the sex scenes aren't showy at all. I mean, we don't get, I very much would have loved even a Gina Davis side boob would have sufficed, but we didn't even get that. That's okay. We do get Jeff Goldblum butt though. I'll take that. But what you said is like there is meaning behind it, because there's the relationship sex, and it's like, and there's another one in there too, but so it's like the very first one is like, them having sex together, and maybe Seth might not be a virgin, but you can tell he's probably not a guy that has a lot of sex, and like you can kind of tell, like the way they like stop having sex is very awkward, like it like just like kind of tapered off, and it made me laugh, because I mean you can just like tell he's not like that sexual of a guy. And then they have sex, and after he went through a transport, when he's like at his peak, and they have sex for hours, and she's like, how are you even still have fluids? And he like still wants to have more sex, because he's like, all beefed up, so it's like he has that, you know, transformation that's like still when they're together. And then, like you said, then we have the barfly, and then it's like, yeah, no, like there's no romance, it's just I'm an alpha, you know, and all those things. So yeah, like he uses the sex scenes as character progression in this movie, and that's the way you should do it, obviously.
And it's really interesting how he's able to kind of facilitate the sex scenes around Brundle's mental state. And that's really a big element of this film. And obviously it goes through a lot of Cronenberg's films, especially in the 80s and earlier, his kind of obsession with flesh and with bodies, and the ways in which he's able to kind of manipulate that in wonderfully disturbing ways. And something that's really interesting about this film, I think, is his obsession. And this is coming off of the heels of Videodrome, which was in 83, I believe. And it's interesting how he blends flesh and metal and technology. And again, it comes back to your point that you made earlier. Like, this is a really fantastic example of his blending of subgenres in unique and interesting ways, where he takes the science element, the sci-fi, and then he blends it with the body horror element that he's so well known for. And I mean, it really does make for, granted, we'll get into the practical effects that really facilitate all of that, but it does show you again that Cronenberg is able to make a mood and an uncomfortableness with his films in a way that really, I don't think can be replicated. And it's kind of like we had said earlier, it's all, I mean, within the first 10 or 15 minutes of a Cronenberg movie, you know you're watching a Cronenberg movie.
Yeah, I very much like you said, his obsession with flesh and skin and body, and because like those are things I'm interested in. Like, there's something about, you know, when you like kind of see the difference, like, you know, like when you start seeing he has like this like ooze like slightly off his skin, and like, you know, as the film goes, he like gets like sweatier. Like after he transforms, like, I mean, Cronenberg loves making men sweaty in his movies. Right. But yeah, this, like, you know, there's always like this like his films are very tactile. Like they have like really great texture to them. And like, especially like at the very end, you know, after so we have Seth Brundlefly Pod now, and he has the metal and the wires run through him, and there's like, the blending of those, you know. I bet Cronenberg wishes he made Tetsuo with Iron Man so bad. He was like, he saw that and he goes, damn it, how did I not make that movie? Right. But obviously, you know, whoever directed Tetsuo was a big Cronenberg fan, obviously. But I love directors with like recurring motifs, you know, like you said, and like kind of, you know, which adds to, like you said, that signature. Like as an aspiring filmmaker myself, like I think that's like one of my ultimate goals is like I want people to be able to just like watch what I'm watching or watch what they're watching and be like, yes, this is a DeVaughn Taylor like thing. Like I see that, and you know, that's the reason I do photography mainly, is like to try to, you know, harness that, like, what is my vibe, you know. And the way that Cronenberg returns to a lot of his same themes and aesthetics is good, but it's also like, it's not like it's not repetitive, because he switches it up. He does it in different ways, you know. It's not like he's just doing the same thing over and over again either. He's exploring the same motif, but he does it in such, you know, radically different ways in all of his films.
That was something that I talked about with another guest in another Masters of Horror episode when we were talking about John Carpenter, right? He's got this signature style that kind of permeates throughout all of his work, but it never feels like he's doing an impression of an older work of his. Everything, it kind of feels very wholly original in whatever project he's tackling, and yet you can still notice the sort of signature motifs and stylistic choices that he makes. And something that I never really appreciated about this film was, again, it comes back to the pacing and how we never actually see the monster until the back half of the film, which is so rare. And that's one of the biggest changes from the original, coming back to this idea that this is such a fundamentally strong remake, in that in the original film, it's the transformation's immediate. Whereas in this, the metamorphosis into Brundlefly is so periodic. And I mean, that's why this film largely feels like an analogy for like disease. or like cancer.
Yeah,
because it's so slow in the deterioration, and we go through multiple different kind of Brundlefly phases that it really packs the scares throughout the film in a way that you never get bored with anything that's happening, right? You don't kind of he doesn't blow his cherry early on. Here's the monster. It's slow and gradual. And I mean, for me, that's what fuels the tragic nature of their relationship, is that watching a loved one break down over time. Like, that's something that a lot of people could probably relate to on some level, right? Seeing somebody get older or dealing with an illness, and yet it's taken to this horrifying extreme as only Cronenberg can.
Yeah, they directly reference it to cancer in the film, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, it's a very steady, the way that they do it. I think the practical effects, it was like 27 phases was like the way that they like planned it out for him to eventually make it into Brundlefly, which is just like, I mean, the attention to detail is just like crazy. And then it's like the way they do it too, it's like it's slow, and then it starts speeding up, and then just speeds up at the end, and then boom, it's just like now we have this full on, he is no longer human by the end, pretty much. He is just like this full on monster, and it's so goo. Like, I mean, Cronenberg's movies are so gooey. He loves him some goo, whether it's coming out of people's mouths or their skin. He loves goo and blood. I love it.
Well, that's why his handling of gore and things to that nature, like, that's like the word that you use to describe it, which I think is perfect, is tactile. It's very tactile in a way that it doesn't just feel like it. This is why all of the kind of gore and blood and shocking imagery in his movies feels so different than anything you've seen before, just because it has that tactileness, and the way that he kind of builds up to things is so detailed that nothing feels like it's kind of shocking for the sake of being shocking or anything like that, right? It's kind of, the build up to it is gradual, so you're almost anticipating it to happen. You're almost anticipating he's going to start ripping out teeth and fingernails and pus, because he's been this sweaty, disgusting mess for the last 30 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, it's like every time I rewatch it, I always think to myself, I'm like, am I desensitized, or am I just like, as I like kind of rewatch it, it's like it's pretty restrained. Like, I mean, he really like holds it in, and then like when the bad stuff does happen, it's like really quick, obviously, like I referenced it in the first episode that I came on, is, the arm wrestling scene is something. It was just, I remember watching it for the first time, and it just seared in my brain, and I just like, but it, and then like, I mean, it's not, it's, it's just it's so simple. Like, it's not something, crazy. And then I love, the scene where it is, when Ronnie records Brundle doing the food demonstration.
Yeah.
And then I love that he doesn't show the video, he just plays the sounds, and then we see Stathus, how he's reacting to the video. And even that, I was just like, oh yeah, like I totally forgot that we, like, in this scene we don't actually see it yet, him doing it, and then like we kind of see him doing it, like the spit stuff, but then we don't actually see him, like, however he sucks it back up. I can only imagine it is absolutely disgusting. I've always wanted to see what it was. Like, I've always wished like that was a deleted scene or something, to like actually see like the video footage, which is something that I appreciated on the rewatch today, was the use of the video footage throughout the film. Not enough to be in the pseudo found footage category, but that'd be cool if somebody is going to, like, I hope they don't make another Fly movie, but if you were going to, I think the Fly found footage film would actually be pretty dope.
That would be a pretty good platform for that. I think also we have to should have mentioned from the beginning of talking about the effects in the film. I mean, Chris Wallace was in charge of makeup effects and fly design, and he'd go on to like win the Oscar for this movie. And I thought it was really funny that he talked to his crew before they took on this project, and they were, I guess, lined up to do Gremlins 2, the new batch. It was either they were going to do that or they were going to do The Fly, and I guess for The Fly they only had like 3 months or something to get all of this practical work done, which is insane to me that it came out as good as it did, but it was one of those things where it came down to this, that they could either build off of something that was established, or they could kind of have the keys of the kingdom and create something from the ground up in a way that, I mean, this movie stands for me as this and The Thing are probably the two best examples of kind of like when people talk about, oh, do you like what movies do you like that have great practical effects? It would be these two, because they're two films that, again, they're very tactile in their effects, and it's kind of, before you even see the monster, it's the buildup almost. It's seeing something break down in a way that still kind of is familiar or resembles a human, and then within the blink of an eye, like you said, it kind of just goes all out in a way that it becomes unrecognizable.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not like anti-CGI like some people are. Like, you know, CGI has its place, you know, for sure, but it's like if they were to, you know, when you watch movies now and they're doing like de-aging, you know, and, you know, digital effects and that nature, they would do that for a Fly movie now, and like, and it just wouldn't have the same, you know, impact. Like, I mean, in rewatching it this morning, like, I saw mistakes, and that's okay. You know, I would rather have this, you know, knowing that, you know, Jeff Goldblum is trying to act through, you know, 10 pounds of prosthetic makeup.
Yeah.
And he's, you know, trying to emote, and it kind of puts you in the headspace of like, you know, Seth is going further and further into himself and losing less and less humanity, you know, and losing to this form that he's taking now. And it just wouldn't have that effect if they just like were to digitally do that through, you know, throughout the movie. It just wouldn't work. And then at the very end either, like, you know, like I would like a digital Brundlefly, that would just be so weird, you know, and like having Gina Davis's reaction to this. I mean, like, imagine just like filming this scene. Like, I mean, geez, and she is so good in that finale. Oh my gosh, like in that scene, and then there's like an earlier scene, like Gina Davis has a like top tier cry face. Like, she is so good in that final scene. Like, she's, you know, like it just wouldn't, yeah, like when you have something in front of you, but like I said, like when with the tactile nature of it, like, you know, when you watch a movie and then you like kind of get that feeling in your mouth, and your mouth starts watering because you kind of like can like feel what they're like seeing, like it's like, that's weird, and like that's just like it adds a whole new layer.
Yeah, it definitely I definitely would not want them to make another one, because that would definitely be the angle they would take. They would definitely kind of have CGI heavy, but I think it's interesting you brought up like he had to wear, I think, like 10 pounds of makeup, like you said, or prosthetics. And at some certain points, you actually see him like struggling to move, and yet him struggling to move plays into the physicality of the metamorphosis stage that he's at, and it adds a lot of like literal weight, but also weight, this idea that his body is changing to the point where his own voice isn't recognizable. Obviously his limbs are falling off, but also just like his ability to even like his mobility is so hindered by this that for me, like it really like is upsetting to me seeing him go through this stage the older I get, because then I start thinking about like my grandparents and things like that, and I'm like, yeah, they're never going to be a fly monster, hopefully, but this idea that over time, like, these things that we take for granted are going to become more difficult. Just walking around is going to become more difficult. This idea that, I mean, communicating to a certain extent might become more difficult. And Cronenberg's ability to really capture these human fears and these human traits, whether they be physical or mental, his ability to kind of capture that and then obviously exemplify that into this this technological body horror nightmare is a talent that I think it goes back to just the rewatchability of this movie. There are themes that are very simplistic, and then he's able to take that high concept or that gruesome, goopy concept that we love so much and apply it to these human traits in a way that it just makes it incredibly watchable, or more watchable than a guy that vomits acid should be.
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply effective, and like you said, like you when you're watching this, like you just genuinely feel bad for Seth as like you're watching it. I mean, shout out, one, I love that it did win the Oscar for makeup. Like, that's just amazing. I love it when, you know, horror movies get some recognition like that. So I do love that, well deserved. But then yeah, like the biggest things that I like noticed on this rewatch was like, you know, one, like the voice, because like again, like if you were to CGI the makeup and the look, now you got to digitally alter the voice, and now that's taking away from the performance. Like Jeff Goldblum, he literally like is struggling to move his mouth because he just has so much shit on his face and he has these crazy teeth in his mouth, like, you know, these fake teeth in his mouth. So he literally, as an actor, he is struggling to, you know, still emote and, you know, still speak in the way he speaks, you know. And then like looking at his eyes, if you look at his eyes in this movie and don't get like instantly depressed, like I don't know what to tell you, because like Jeff Goldblum just like really sells it, and like you see it like because they're like sunken into, you know. And I mean, and he just has this like look of just like pure hopelessness at one point, like when he kind of, you know, is realizing like, if I don't do something, like I'm done for, you know. And a look at desperation, which I found very like just powerful.
Yeah, and I think that it comes back to kind of his character arc, right? He, as fate would have it, one night he was at like this work function which he probably did not want to be at because, like you said, he kind of has these sort of social awkwardness. It might be a result of like being partially on the spectrum or something like that, where he does not fit in. And then of course he meets this beautiful woman and they have this relationship and this romance, and to some extent it's probably something that he has always fantasized about having, right? Because he's this mental giant, and yet he lacks the social skills to kind of flourish in a way perhaps that he always wanted to. So he goes from sort of like quote unquote some type of social lows to having the best of both worlds, a beautiful woman and then the intellect, and finally having the breakthrough on his project, and then he gets carried away with it, right? And we see early on that he has this rigidness, and he has, I wouldn't say like, he's got this quality to him that he can get carried away because he's too focused. And if that means cutting out other people, so be it to a certain extent. But he's able to tame that a little bit with Gina Davis's character. But then of course he gets carried away again at a little success. He becomes jealous and he decides, hey, I'm going to go through with this experiment on my own. And now it's all taken away in the blink of an eye because of a common housefly. Yeah,
like I think one of the scarier elements of this film that, you know, people don't really talk about is when you said he has the best of both worlds, you know, there's a section where he's at his peak, you know, like a little bit after the transformation or after the teleportation, and he's at his peak. He has Ronnie, his thing works, he has the intellect already, now he's got the physical peakness, and he's got the confidence, and he still has his charm. I mean, he is at one point he is, and he's also Jeff Goldblum, he's the perfect man. Like at one point he is absolutely perfect, and then that's like, you know, what kind of flips that switch in his brain. And Jeff Goldblum's performance in that section is like very scary because, like, one, you're not used to him as an actor kind of going to that darker place, and it's just like, it's really scary in this like intimidation, like you said, or he has it all at this point. And like he's just like, and you get this like sense of danger from him. So it's like, you know, you have this like sense of danger in his eyes and the way he's performing. And then as it, you know, flips to the other side of where he just like loses everything, loses all hope, and they just gets like absolutely desperate. It's just like, man, it's really good. And now I want to see like current day Jeff Goldblum in a really like dark role. Like full on like real dark. I think that'd be great.
His capacity to take it that dark and that disturbing of a performance is because even if you look at his character and you strip away like he's mutating into a fly monster, this idea that the characteristics that he adapts all of a sudden once he kind of is at his peak, that there's nothing unrealistic about that. We all know people that as soon as they kind of get what they want, they change into somebody completely different, or they use that kind of power, that perceived new status to be shitty to other people and to kind of further manipulate and use people to get what they want. And that portrayal is why that's what's so disturbing about that for me, is that all of the sci-fi elements and body horror stuff removed, like that is a very scary type of person. And you see like he becomes manic, and that for me is the most terrifying part. Removed from some of the body horror stuff, it's just this idea that he starts babbling about like plasma pools and all of these things. He gets this god complex that there are people that fall down into that rabbit hole, and it's a portrayal that, again, it speaks to like him on a human level before we get to kind of the Fly level. But that human level is one that is very much rooted in reality. And for me, that's one of the definitely the more frightening elements of it because of how plausible that is.
Yeah, like it's just super, yeah, like when you think about it, it just gets super scary. And like I just thought of this just now. I want to get real like dark for a sec, or deep. Like, so the scene, you know, after the arm wrestling, he takes home that other gal, right? And the intentions and like the attitude that he has in his brain, you know, is very predatory. And it's like when you think about it, it's like he doesn't rape her, but he kind of does. Like he can, like, you know, in the way that he manipulates her and just like is kind of just going along with everything. Like she was like, oh, I want to go more bars. Fine, we'll go to more bars, whatever, I don't care, as long as we're gonna go back to my place, we're gonna fuck, and I'm gonna put you through a teleportation thing. Like, and wanting to put her through a teleportation thing, that's like rapey intentions kinda in a weird way.
Well, the idea that he's going to ply her with more and more booze, she succumbs to his will, even though his initial interest in her is not sexual, even though it does go there. Like, he still wants to use her for something, whether it be sex or this fucked up experiment. Like this, it's the same qualities of a predator that would go on to rape someone.
Yeah, because but like they have sex, but then at that point it wasn't about sex. Like he didn't really care. He was like, oh, whatever. Like, yeah, she was like, oh, great night. Like, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, whatever. I don't care. Anyway, so about this teleportation pod, and it's like, and thinking about it in that aspect, I was like, oh, that's weird. And it's great that Cronenberg, you know, being a master, knows that he doesn't need to go there. You know, there's other directors that would not have the restraint, and they would have him rape somebody in this movie. You know, you almost think he's gonna rape Ronnie, but he doesn't. You almost think he's gonna, you know, kind of rape this guy, and it's not in that traditional sense. But any other, you know, less competent director would definitely be like, ah, fuck it, yeah, he's going crazy. We're gonna have him get this gown. And it's gonna be gross. And it's like, we didn't have to go there, but the idea is still there. And like, again, that's why he's a master.
And I think that really ties back into the restraint aspect on his part, right? He's able to be restrained in the way that he doesn't need to take it there, because if he takes it to too much of an extreme, we don't feel sympathetic for Brundle anymore. And we're not going to feel sympathetic when he turns into a monster, because then at that point you're like, well, he's a piece of shit. Like if he's raping people, like if he played up that interaction between him and the girl from the bar even more so, you lose all sympathy, and then it's like, good, I'm glad he got shot in the fucking head. Whereas at the end of the film, like, that whole sequence is heartbreaking, where he's this fly metal mashup, and he can barely raise his claw, and then he drags the shotgun barrel to his head. Like, that loses all of the emotional weight to that scene. If, well, yeah, he deserves that. He's a rapist piece of shit. So that restraint, again, from like his selective use of sex and using sex smartly throughout the film to establish relationships, but then also the restraint in, I mean, it comes through in like the metamorphosis phases of Brundlefly, but just the restraint throughout the film in all aspects really does kind of carry the underlying message that Cronenberg's sending throughout the film in a way that, like we had said, if he was not a master of horror, it would have ended much differently.
It kind of plays on this idea of, you know, it's the intentions and like, you know, where he's at mentally, and like, you know, also the idea that like maybe there was a layer of this already there in him, you know, but again, he didn't have to go full tilt on him and then lose the sympathy from him. There's there was a quote that stuck out to me in this one. I'm an insect that dreamt he was a man, but now that's over. That insect has woken up. I thought that was like really interesting. I was like, huh, you know, and just like kind of this like, you know, like, you know, I am, you know, just like, I'm small, you know, like he finally at this point realizes, you know, he's not this. I mean, he is a genius, he is like this, but this is his ego finally getting put in check of being like, I am small and insignificant, but I'm still trying to, you know, do something more. So it's like, this is like, so it's like, you know, it goes back and forth, which I really like, because I mean, it is like a pretty steady progression of him getting dark, but then he'll go dark and then he'll reel it back in a little bit and he'll go back and then, you know, to get you back on Seth's side a little bit more, and then they go forward more, you know. So the way that he goes in that fashion instead of just like kind of just it being, you know, one fluid thing, it just kind of adds a little bit to the character progression.
Yeah, and I mean, the characters themselves become really boring if they're just kind of black and white, right? He's either really, really bad or really, really good. And you see the value in the relationship more than just like a physical attraction. Ronnie actually brings out the better elements of him, and he makes him a person that you actually want to root for, even though he has that darkness inside of him that as soon as him and Ronnie begin to split away because of his own actions, like he kind of spirals, and then she comes back when he needs her, when his body is literally breaking down, and he's got the crutches at one point, and he vomits on the donut, and then he looks at her and she's like, oh, that's disgusting, isn't it? Like little moments like that. I mean, it really does show that the two characters complete one another in a way that it makes their relationship more than just like a cheap plot device. Or that's what the male character and the female character, of course they should get together. Like, it actually lends a lot of credence to Cronenberg's entire approach to the narrative he's telling in a way that touches on multiple levels, in a way that makes it complicated, and it makes some elements of it ugly and some elements of it sexy, and that complicated nature of a relationship, I find, makes it memorable in a way that not a lot of relationships are. I mean, we said earlier, like, they had this snappy dialogue and this kind of teasing one another, and yet it never feels rom-comish. And that's really important to the integrity of that relationship. Yeah,
it feels just, it's very real, and like, even, and you know, in the finale especially, it's just, you know, so tragic that there's even still a moment where it's like Ronnie's like, I can't kill you, like you're a monster pod man, and I still don't want to kill you, like, right. And you feel that though, like, it, you know, that sounds outlandish, but it's like you still feel it because like they took the time to make this relationship so genuine, so that way, you know, when it's like, if the relationship didn't feel real and you weren't invested this whole time, you know, when you think about a fly pod man taking a shotgun and putting it in front of his head, that sounds kind of silly. But just because we were so invested in the way that they, you know, handled the entire story, you felt it, and it was just absolutely tragic. You know, he puts it there. Gina Davis, the way she like kind of, she collapses for a sec, but then she also, you know, doesn't hesitate too long either. It's not like drawn out like no. It's just like she's like, I don't want to, but then she like is just like, I have to, and you know, and you feel it, you know, and it's just see, it's so good. The romance, the build up to that moment too, like if she had a moment where she could break, right? She knows that he's changing, and she knows that he's turning into something that is horrible. And yet, if she can watch the man she loves, watch his ear fall off and still hang around with him, yeah, you believe that she's going to stick to the end, whether it has a happy or a negative outcome. And that is, again, it legitimizes their relationship in a way that, yeah, you could see her sticking around and doing the unthinkable to the man that she loves because she loves him. If she didn't love him, she would have fucking ran out of the room. She wouldn't have shot him. She would have said, well, this isn't my problem anymore. Yeah. I mean, the scene that, like, you know, like you said, like after he like loses his ear, and she still hugs him. He is covered in goop. He is thrown up on donuts in front of you. He's been climbing walls. He is so disgusting, and she's still willing to embrace him, like, to support him. I was just like, man, I felt that one. Like, I need that hug right now, Gina Davis.
we all need to find our Ronnie, right? In wrapping up, I was curious if there are any kind of like little moments that really stick with you in this film that I kind of glossed over. Because one for me is the fingernails, man. That every single time I see him like start to pull off his fingernails, and I'm like, oh, that's still so fucking gross. And then he goes to squeeze them and starts spraying pus all over his bathroom mirror. Like, that's one of those scenes that I've probably seen it a dozen times, and it still makes my skin crawl.
I mean, I like to think I'm pretty strong stomached and willed when it comes to horror. I can watch some pretty fucked up shit, but the simplest things that will always get me is one, fingernails getting peeled. Like, I can't, because it's just such a realistic and like, like relatable thing. Like, cause I mean, how often do you fucking bend your nails back and forth, and then the other one is teeth. Like, teeth will always get me. I have a recurring nightmare that involves teeth, literally weekly, of like some scenario of teeth falling out or them like moving around in my mouth. Like, it freaks me out. So teeth will always get me as well. So there's like the one where he just like his like teeth fall, and they just like kind of just like the way he spits it out, and like is like, I was just like, oh no, always.
But Chris Wallace definitely earned his pay on this one. And I mean, to kind of combine the teeth with the practical effects of the movie, that scene when Gina Davis rips off his jaw, and then you see the mandibles, his new mandibles that are still moving, like that part always freaks me out.
The way they like twitch.
Yeah, they're still twitching, because I have a thing about mouths and teeth, and it's just that whole thing freaks me out. And then of course the rest of his face starts tearing apart in a way that, again, it all feels believable, and there's within the world that Cronenberg makes, it feels very natural what's happening because of that texture that he applies to everything leading up to it. Whether it's very subtle at first, he's growing these gross black hairs everywhere, or his skin is all getting kind of acne riddled, or he starts like sweating and there's pus coming out of him. Like, you believe that everything that's happening to him is building to this. So that way when it does happen, it doesn't age in a way that makes it feel like ridiculous. Like, if you try to go back and watch some older horror movies, sometimes you see the practical effects and you're like, yeah, I'm kind of seeing some flaws in this that I didn't used to. But in this, I feel like the buildup is so natural that what occurs, even if, like you said, you notice a couple of faults or things here and there, it gets sold in a way that you can tell Cronenberg put in the legwork to making sure that it feels legitimate, and it feels just as disgusting as the first time you see it.
Yeah, like I said, like I saw a few things here and there that like I was like, that's flapping. I see the seal coming up on it. It's all good though, like, because it doesn't matter, because I'm not supposed to be like, that's not the highlight here. I mean, it's a part of it, but that's not the highlight here. And I also gotta shout out once again, Stathus is a very interesting character. One, that's the worst name ever. Who came up with that?
That's like a really boarding school preppy name.
Like the name is weird, but like, I mean, I don't have the Wikipedia page up anymore, but the actor that plays him, John Getz. Yeah, he's really good. Like, the skeeviness is there, but then like once you see him just like start reeling it in, and then like realizing, and then you're like, oh, like, okay, he isn't just the creepy ex-boyfriend that's just like hanging around taking showers in her apartment. He also still cares for Ronnie, even though they aren't together anymore. He is her boss also, and it like very interesting that like that's a character that could be like be so bad for the film. Like that could be a character that could sink the film, honestly, if not, you know, done well. And like, I mean, sometimes it's a little bit like kind of like, you know, whatever. But like at the same time, like, because it's like, oh, do I need scenes of Gina Davis and Stathus interacting at the mall? No, but it's there for a reason, and you know, it just builds him out as a character as well. And then he also, you know, gets his hand and ankle melted off, which are amazing still, like really good, like because you see a maniacal look in like Seth's eyes after he does the hand, and then he like is excited to do it on his foot, and it's like, oh man. And then, which is super weird to wrap back in, Stathus and the effects, they're the only things that carry over into The Fly 2. I haven't seen The Fly 2, but I've heard it's actually decent. Like, I heard it's not terrible, but obviously, like, when Cronenberg turned it down, people were kind of like, eh. But I did watch the Good Bad Flicks review of it, and I was like, oh, I should actually check this movie out, maybe, you know, because obviously there's a Brundle baby still in Gina Davis's stomach at the end of the movie. That was a dream sequence. Oh, had to shout the dream sequence. Man, that shit is nightmare fuel.
Well, that's like the ultimate body horror moment of the film, because it's this idea that it's like there's something inside of you and you have to get it out sooner rather than later. Like, and I mean, that's Cronenberg cameo too, as the surgeon.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's an absolutely disgusting moment that, I mean, again, it comes back to this idea that Cronenberg is able to sell these, because what sells that scene isn't really the worm baby, right? It's Gina Davis's freaking the fuck out and her anxiety about there being something in her body. Again, coming back to this obsession with flesh, something is inside of her body that she doesn't want to be there. And seeing her anxiety and her terror over that before you even see the worm baby is in and of itself disturbing and upsetting. It's upsetting on like a human level, because you see this person that is so sweet and loving, and then before she even sees the fly monster, you see her and she's just so distressed, and you just want to kind of like reach out and help.
Yeah, it's her reaction to that is really great. Really great scream work in this movie. Underrated. There's some underrated screams in here. Gina Davis, her reaction to Worm Baby, great scream. Stathus when he gets his hand melted off, a really great horror scream.
For sure. And in regards to The Fly 2, I actually just watched that for the first time a couple of months ago, and I would say it's definitely worth watching. Obviously, you have to go into it knowing it is nowhere as good as Cronenberg's The Fly, but it does have a similar attention to stellar practical effects, and it was actually directed by Chris Wallace, who did this practical effects for this film.
He directed it.
Yeah,
gotcha.
So he directed it, and then I believe he also did the practical effects for that one. So on that front, it's an awesome continuation of kind of just the body horror centric nature of The Fly that Cronenberg kickstarted, and that carries over. Narratively, it's not nearly as good, and there's no characters that have any semblance of a relationship that really rivals Goldblum or Gina Davis, but it is really practical effects heavy and rewarding in that instance. And Stathus does make a cameo in that, but it's very, very slight. But I wish I had brought up his character earlier, because his character really does complement the relationship between Brundle and Ronnie, in that it makes it this sordid kind of love triangle where the remnants of the past are trying to still interfere with the future. And again, nobody is really black and white in this, right? He's introduced to us as this scumbag. And then over time, he kind of has a bit of a turn. He's still invested in Ronnie in a way that, I want to help her out in this situation. And then, of course, he comes to her rescue at the end of the film. And had he just been like the ultimate scumbag and Cronenberg kind of just overdone that angle, you don't give a shit when he gets his hand and his foot melted at the end of the film, right? It's kind of like, yeah, it's what you deserve. I hope he vomits on your face next, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, man, I had a blast as always chatting horror with you and coming on and talk about The Fly, because this is definitely one of those movies that every time I revisit it, it's kind of like the angle that I love so much about your podcast, in that when I revisit movies now, I think about them in terms of like, oh, what kind of subgenre angles does this take? Or does this introduce? And it really does make revisiting old movies that much more fun and enjoyable. It's something that you and I share a great love for, and just revisiting films and looking at them differently. So it's always a blast chatting with you. And I'd love to give you a minute to kind of just plug your show, because I've had the pleasure of being on, and obviously you've been on my show, and we just have really great conversations.
Yeah, man, I definitely appreciate you having me back on for this one. Yeah, like I said, like rewatching movies is like a really big thing for me. Like I love, my comfort movies, and it's weird that this is a comfort movie, but it is just like, it's so smooth. It's just, so lean. I mean, it's perfect. Like it's a film that there's a lot more going on. Like I said, it's like, obviously it's memorable for the body horror elements and stuff, but there is a full thing there that makes those crazy moments count, and that's why Cronenberg is a master. So yeah, thank you for having me on the show once again. Yeah, loved having you on Bloody Blunt Cinema Club, which is my podcast where we do break down the subgenres of horror films. Every month we do like a theme, and then whenever we talk the movies within that theme, then we kind of go in deeper than that as well, and just talk about the movies that we love. So if you want to check that out, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Bloody Blunt CC, and my personal Twitter and Instagram pages are _DaddyDisco. I write for Nightmare on Film Street. I do short films. I do a lot of random things. So follow me.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service, and follow the show on Instagram at Daily Horror Habit and on Twitter at Daily Horror Pod for episode updates. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.